Hello and welcome to the Institute of Hazard Risk and Resilience series on debates over time. I'm your host, Carly Beckerman, and joining me today is Elisabeth Kirtsoglou, Bob Simpson and Felix Ringel, all from the Department of Anthropology at Durham University. And we're talking about your new book, The Time of Anthropology, Studies of Contemporary Chronopolitics. Now, to someone who's not super familiar with this field, the book looks slightly intimidating, but right from the preface, like where you start with Laura Baer's preface, I understand that it's really important that we talk about time. It seems that there are a lot of vulnerable people, from refugees to patients in hospitals to climate change activists, who are struggling through very real crises that are intimately connected to how we think about time and the future and whether there is a future. And this is why we need to talk about chronocracy, right? Like I get that right from the very beginning. I'm immediately fascinated by the first page. So perhaps we can start with you, Elisabeth, explaining what chronocracy means.
Chronocracy is a political technology, is the way we use time in academia, but also outside academia, in policy, in public talk, the way we use time in order to displace other people from the present. To give you a very easy example of that, a very common example of that, when we use terms like backward, or when we use terms like in need of modernization, we basically imply that people around the world live in different kinds of temporalities, and that some temporalities are ahead of others. And this, of course, creates all sorts of problems, which in anthropology we call them coevalness, problems with coevalness. So it's all of those political technologies that they are sometimes ontological, sometimes epistemic, so they have to do with the production of knowledge, sometimes moral and sometimes discursive and sometimes practical, that are used to deny some people coevalness.
Okay, so is the problem that there's a kind of hierarchy of time?
It's a problem of hierarchy of time, of hierarchy of temporalities, by which some people are thought, some countries, some regions, some groups, some communities are thought, are regarded as living in a different kind of temporality than us.
Okay, so there's core issues of injustice almost at the heart of this.
It is a huge kind of injustice. It's a structural injustice. It's a temporal injustice, but also it's a kind of injustice that has very real consequences in the way we deal with other people.
Okay, so it feels like a very timely volume, especially at the moment. Bob, if you could talk us through what the book is trying to achieve in this space.
Yes, it comes out of a conference that was held in Durham in 2016, the conference of the Association of Social Anthropologists, the annual conference. And we identified as the theme there, the time of anthropology. And time within anthropology has been extensively studied. There are lots of ideas of the anthropology of time. We wanted to kind of reverse that and focus on the time of anthropology, look at the ways in which all sorts of temporalities of the kind that Elisabeth has outlined are having effects in the world. So that flip around of focusing on the time of anthropology introduces a kind of a reflexive element, how anthropological knowledge making itself has temporalities inbuilt, which might be complicit in the very things that we were looking at. So the book is really an assembly of a series of ethnographic case studies in which those various collisions of temporalities, the hegemony of time, the way in which one powerful set of ways of reckoning time either incorporates or excludes others. And we have about 9 chapters, which each provide a really fascinating insight into real-time lived experience when you have these collisions, these tensions between different temporalities.
I really like that word complicit, because it seems like, looking at the chapters, that each one represents a kind of slap in the face, like a rude awakening, a need to look at something in much more depth as to like the local and long-term consequences of these, you said the hegemonic views of time.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate, or am I
Well, there's a phrase in the introduction that we use about making time differently visible. That it is there, it is having effects. We are part of that. There's all sorts of things happening in the world where there are these ruptures and disjunctions, and we can talk about them in terms of spatial inequality and economic inequality. But what we want to do with this collection is to add another dimension, which is to bring to the sort of make differently visible the role of temporality in the conditions that we seek to describe.
I like that, differently visible. Is that why the chapters are quite diverse, so you get a really good, like, wide snapshot of problems that this needs to address?
I think we're trying to do, obviously it was a big conference and the selection of chapters was quite difficult, but one of the things that we were quite keen to do was to capture the scales at which temporality operates. So within the chapters, in one you have the very small scale temporality of people suffering from depression and the whole idea of waiting, and the temporalities that are involved with diagnoses, which place them in a position of kind of stagnation, of being out of time, out of modern time, and needing to be reintegrated. So that's a very sort of almost microscopic timescale. But then we have people talking about, there's a chapter which deals with genomics and the way that genomics are represented. So here you're talking about evolutionary time and the kinds of representations sort of the tree and the implications that has for creating differences between races, rather than emphasizing the interweaving of different racial. It just creates a different sort of temporality and reinforces that what Elisabeth was saying earlier about the kind of hierarchies of time.
Yes, gosh, talking about microcosms and then deep time at the same time.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah, that's my brain is melting slightly out of my ears as we get into this. But you've kind of touched there on what I was going to ask next, which is the central problems that need fixing here. And we've talked about the different chapters. Felix, you've contributed one of those chapters. So what kind of problems are you deliberately trying to address there?
So my chapter, again, which is one of many interesting contributions here, but my chapter specifically focuses on the issue of temporal agency. So in this context of a particular chronopolitics or chronocracy, obviously human beings respond to that. They relate to this. They try to make their way through the times they're living in, quite literally, with a form of temporal agency. They can relate to time in very different ways. And my chapter focuses on two kinds of temporal agencies. One is, and Bob has already mentioned that, the academics' implications in chronocracy and chronopolitics, and I'll come to that in a moment, but it also focuses on what is happening in my field site, post-industrial city. And we can say that the chronocracy that is ruling there is not anymore one of growth and capitalism as we know it, but the city has tried to reinvent itself as a sustainable city. And here you see two clashes, one of linear time, growth, decline, versus one of cyclical time, right? Sustainable is usually thought of as something that is more circular rather than linear, right? But what kind of temporal agency can we expect in that kind of context? So what kind of temporal agency is engendered in a context that is all about, in my case, urban sustainability? And I say that we as academics might not be in a good position to read that kind of temporal agency, which is more about maintenance, endurance, repair, rather than new ideas, novelty. And that's the general idea we have of agency, or in general, but also of temporal agency. So temporal agency usually caters to the invention of something new. You have to make a difference. But I think there's a blind spot, and other social sciences have addressed that already, in kind of understanding that kind of agency that is not about the novel, but it is about making forms endure. So that's a very, very important or a very important topic right now, because in our work we have to find new ways of relating to the future, and that kind of temporal agency that I am after, I think, would allow us to do so.
Okay, brilliant. So I feel like then immediately the book is dealing with a lot of problems faced by individuals and communities and regions even, but also you're sort of holding other anthropologists to account. There's wry smiles. Is that have I touched on a touchy subject?
Can I come in on that just very quickly? I mean, I think most people will have heard about the concept of Orientalism. Right, and that's a concept that was brought up by Edward Said, and I think it catered to not just anthropology but the social sciences and history more generally. How do you depict or present the other? And again, as Elisabeth has said at the beginning, we're all falling trap into that. We kind of think of something as being of the future and other stuff as being of the past, and so we deny coevalness. Given my chapter and my contribution, I'm kind of asking my colleagues as well. So what is a way forward for anthropology? That was a question that was very prominent at the conference where this volume emerged, because it happened just a few days after the Brexit referendum, and everybody was very politicized. And we are also kind of falling prey to the idea that we have to constantly reinvent ourselves in this neoliberal university context. And I'm simply saying, well, maybe we just have to do more of the same, because what we were doing was actually quite good and is good. And this constant urge to innovate ourselves, to do more and do this and that and reach out and all the other stuff, that's obviously important in many ways, but it might also distract us from the core task we have in our societies, which is the production of knowledge and the distribution of that knowledge.
Okay, so
I would like to add,
go ahead, yeah,
possible, that it is not just holding anthropology accountable, is basically holding all kinds of sciences.
right.
Because, for example, history, the way we temporalize, historical temporalization, produces this idea of progress as a collective singular order, and thus as a timescape from which persons and communities can be chronocratically dislocated. But also ideas that we can approach time in two ways, as a natural phenomenon, for example, or as a cultural phenomenon. So, there is the time of physicists and then there is the time of social scientists, also has a little problem there, because if you think about it, for any kind of physicist, if any kind of physicist was in Dhaka in Bangladesh when that sweatshop fell down and cost the lives of approximately 1,000 people in 2013, he could have assured you that people who were killed at that moment, they lived in the same kind of natural time as other people in, say, the Dhaka Stock Exchange building. But this is not entirely true. If you think it in its social consequences, and the same kind of thing we can say happened in, say, the day that the Grenfell Towers caught fire. And the same thing happened when, for example, you had refugees arriving in the shores of Lesbos, Greece, that Aegean island, when at the same time, when other tourists, for example, were enjoying their all-inclusive holidays. So we may be using or living in the same kind of clock time, but this does not necessarily represent and reflect the kind of present, the kind of temporality we're all experiencing. And if I may add also another political dimension, the way that certain people are forced, something that my chapter, for example, addresses, the way that certain people are forced to understand their own history and to understand their own history as progress. But what happens when we locate the greatest moments of our history in the past? And when we are asked to become great again. And when we are asked to become great again, then suddenly our future needs to become very much like our past. And we become nostalgic of our future in a way that we are also becoming nostalgic of our past. And we are sort of locked in this kind of temporal puzzle, if I may say so.
I love that. And again, yeah, my brain is leaking out of my ears. It immediately makes me think of all of the rhetoric surrounding, Make America Great Again, a lot of the discourse in Britain surrounding Brexit. I know we've had a discussion before with the classical Greek civilization and moving into a contemporary situation, and then being nostalgic for a return to the future. But it also makes me think of many monuments, right? Like there are physical representations of this nostalgia, and I feel like we could talk for 6 months. You could explain things to me for a long time, and it's fascinating. So if I'm sort of pulling it back to maybe themes that lots of average people will be familiar with, does this feel a bit like the old racial hierarchies, sort of old imperial thinking that is continuing to exist in ways that maybe we're not noticing? Or the average person isn't noticing too well?
Very much so, because if we think about it, those displacements from time map very closely, if not exactly, but at least very closely, to colonial geographies. And those colonial geographies map again very closely to racialized geographies. So who gets displaced from the present is not entirely random. It has it resonates with historical events, and it resonates with very many years and painful histories, and histories of exploitation, and histories of domination, and histories of inequality.
I see that. Okay, so this is, all right, so it's slightly terrifying as well. You're dealing with a lot of complex subjects. If I can sort of move on to the theme of where do you go from here? So what do you want the average person to take away from reading your book, perhaps, because maybe they should, maybe we all should, but perhaps what you want policymakers or people working in local government, who are actually authority figures, to be considering when they have to think about issues of time and the future. And Bob, you've been quiet for a little while, so I'm going to call. I'm going to be the naughty teacher and call on you and ask you to jump in.
Just to look back to a question you asked before about the effects on a slap in the face for anthropologists. I don't think I would consider it as a slap in the face, but there's a side of it which is a contribution to a very, very long debate which has gone on within anthropology about the nature of time and the nature of temporality. And the way we describe it in the book is in terms of a spiral, or the Archimedes screw, which in a sense we're coming back to the same place, but a little bit further on in time. So it's a way of harmonizing the circularity of time with the linear nature of time. So we're quite modest in our claims, but we do think that they are important within academia. There's some interesting theoretical ideas within the introduction and with the way that the idea of chronocracy is played out in the chapters. In terms of taking it beyond, I hope people would read it as a matter of interest, but to be realistic, what What an area that I think where it could have an impact is in relation to planning. It could be an unwelcome impact, because a lot of what we're talking about in the book and what a lot of the chapters are talking about is the way in which different technologies, different regimes of power are layered, and there is a disjunction between the layers. And Elisabeth has mentioned an example of the sweatshop in Dhaka, and just down the street is the stock exchange. The stock exchange is globally connected through incredible technologies, which produce an instantness about the communication, which is globally connected and instant, whereas all sorts of people are excluded from that. And in relation to planning and development, it's this idea of people having the technology and the power to be able to plan futures for other people to live in. Yeah, so if we're talking about inclusivity, we're talking about participation, major buzzwords in the notion of planning, then hopefully there would be something in the account that we've given that would give the benevolent planner a notion of what it is that they're missing, a notion of why it is that the best laid plans often don't work, because there's an aspect of participation that's not happening. For the less benevolent planner, yeah, hopefully it would be a challenge and a slap in the face, because it's an what we're doing is making differently visible the power structures on which they base their actions and their decision making.
Here are all the things maybe you don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that a lot. Yeah, sorry, Felix.
And I picked that up because I think planning is usually about urban futures, or that's how I envision it in my field site. And I've addressed that previously, but yes, I really agree with Bob. There's something about the inclusivity of how futures are made, the discussions we have. And I want to link that up to the situation we are in now. We are in a crisis. We all are living through it. The pandemic has shaped our lives in new ways. And just being aware of how power is involved in defining a crisis and showing a way out, just by also defining when a crisis is over, for instance, taking that into the conversations we have with one another, I think can be very beneficial. Whether that then translates into policies or not is a different matter, but being aware of the power that structures our time and that we all use and relate to in our own everyday lives, I think is a benefit for everyone. The second aspect I would put out there is again a matter of how do we envision a better future, right? Over the last decades, we've always tried to, we defined the crisis and then we had a solution somewhere that seemed promising because it was different. I'm personally a total welfare state nostalgic. I want there to be stability, I want there to be predictability, and I want there to be an inclusive aspect of that. And I think, God, we've gone so far away. We always, we handed out stuff to the market, whatever that is. We all are indebted now. We're all playing a game that has its own temporal consequences. And Laura Baer in the preface, I think, points it out very nicely. And Elisabeth and Bob also show it very nicely in their introduction. So we are, again, implicit in whatever capitalist time is and the way it structures the temporal regime in which we are living. But we might want to think about, and especially at this very moment, how we want the post-pandemic future or any other post-future, so to speak, how we want that future to look like. How inclusive should it be? How full of solidarity and other equality? How can a better future look like? And again, it doesn't have to be a reinvention of the wheel here. We might also be very creatively reaching back in time and say, no, actually, this is a really good thing. Let's maintain that, right? Let's give it an endurance in time, rather than the hectic life that pre-COVID we've all been subjected to. So yeah, I think at this particular moment, actually a good invitation to think about time, futures, and power in this world.
Yes, power is a good theme. So policymakers wanting to perhaps envision a better future need to also talk to some anthropologists.
True.
I think that's
and perhaps realize that a very common phrase in all kinds of planning and development decisions, the direction of travel. it is not an innocent phrase, because the direction of travel implies that we should aim in towards a certain direction, that direction is forward, and all kinds of directions that are only forward and exponentially forward are bound to leave some people behind. And this is what we are trying to say, that leaving those people behind is really problematic in the visions of societies that we basically sustain.
I feel like that's an excellent point to end on. Something to leave, hopefully what are going to be a lot of viewers, something to think about. I won't make any puns about not having enough time to keep going. So I'll just say thank you very much to our panelists. The link to your book will be below this video. And to viewers, if you've enjoyed this discussion, please remember to click the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you very much.